Hello, everybody. Welcome to the only podcast that has ever existed. My name is Jack. I'm going to be your host. Just kidding. We have 5 hosts. Welcome to Unlikely Disciples, the Catholic podcast for young adults, made by young adults. Today, joining the pod, we have Jack, Jason, Matthew, Ryan, and Louisa.
Hello.
Today, we're going to be talking about our name, the Unlikely Disciples. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, for starters, we hear the word disciples thrown out all the time, but, nobody ever really talks about what a disciple actually is. And so I think that, when we were sitting down and making this name, we were bouncing off a lot of different things. And
A lot.
a lot of different things. And we came across the word disciple, thanks to my dad. And we
Shout out
really...
to Steve.
Yes!
There you go, Steve-O.
And we really started thinking about that word and, what it means to, be a total follower of Christ. And so, the word disciple comes from a Latin word that I can't pronounce. It looks like discipulos, but that's not the correct pronunciation. And it really means to be a pupil, a follower, a student, and a lot of times that's associated with being a pupil, a follower, a student of our dear Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That ultimately is what we're all called to. Weird. So we were thinking about, a Catholic podcast of young adults who are all on this mission to be committed, intentional, purposeful disciples. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that was...
True that, cuz.
True that.
I'm trying to cop on some graces. You feel me?
There you go. When you think about a disciple, you probably think about, the 12 apostles, right? You hear the pretty standard, Peter, James, John, Bartholomew, Thomas, the super key player who's trying to stick his fingers all up in Jesus' hand and side.
Real quick, why'd you go with Bartholomew?
Because Bartholomew was skinned alive. And personally, I don't think he gets enough street cred, because that's bananas. Anyway, that was a side note. Go look up St. Bartholomew. He's super cool. But when you think about disciples, you think about these people that are just so untouchable and unrelatable, and you think about, wow, they were all super holy, and I will never be super holy. I don't know what's happening.
Sorry, I'm choking a little.
For all those who are not watching it, which is the entire world minus 5 people, Matthew just turned and it looks like he's crying in the corner of the couch when he's choking on
I got a tickle in my
water.
throat. Terrible time for a tickle.
He's dying.
Throat.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Terrible time for tickles.
Martyrdom.
Yeah, anyway, Louisa, continue.
And so you think about these people and think about what just happened. We are the most ridiculous people ever.
Ragtag.
And, yeah. And
A real motley crew.
Right. And yet God still calls us in this weirdness and brokenness and funniness, humor, that's the word.
Humorous.
And yeah, and all of these other things, God calls us, as we are, to become his disciples, and he calls us to follow him with the personalities he gave us. Imagine that God actually designed you with a purpose, knowing exactly how you would be, and he wants you to use that personality to glorify him. Whoa.
Bonkers.
Matthew's still choking.
Sorry.
Darn it, Matthew.
My apologies. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to go off of that, but as far as, I guess, why we're doing this and why we feel that there's a need for it, I think that's an important thing to hit on. It's very difficult to find things for young adults, for those in college.
Preach.
To find resources such as podcasts, and you can find those, but then you listen to them and it's people who haven't necessarily been in the same life situations in 15, 20 years. And the reality is that times have changed, and
Times will always change.
right, everything's always changing, right? So it's very difficult to listen to something or watch something or read something, and a person is trying to give advice on kind of where you're at in your life, though they were there 20 years ago. So I think we all felt like there was a need for very, very casual but very intentional conversation
relevant conversation,
Yeah.
if you will.
And to jump off of that, Matthew, I just found a quote that is, "We will never change the world by going to church. We will only change the world by being the church." So I think that is really prominent with the group of us because we are young adults, and like you said, that there isn't a whole lot of young adults that go to church. So if we ultimately want to change our generation, the world around us, we have to have our core Catholic values, and I think that is something that is really interesting, especially we're not only growing as the five of us, but also we're helping all of our listeners grow as well to take that next step into our faith life.
Yeah, because there's like such a lack of community on most campuses that's healthy and supportive and encouraging, and when you lose that community, it becomes a lot harder to practice your faith, particularly in college or at this young adult stage in your life. And currently we're all college students, and in a few months that'll all change, but it is so abundantly clear with our age group that there is that lack of community, and not everybody realizes that there are people around them that also want this support and this encouragement. And so we're hoping that you, beloved listener, that you find a space here that you can feel connected to Catholic young adults, and you can grow and you can change and do all that kind of stuff.
Would one call it unlikely to find a positive community?
Oh, I get it.
Oh, I get it. Wait a minute.
What are you getting at, Ryan?
So I'm trying to get at the first half of our name, unlikely.
Oh, that entire word.
Yes.
Weird, that's like 50% of our name.
Indeed, it is 50% of our name. But kind of going off what Jason was saying with the youth aspect, youth, young adult, and kind of what Matthew was saying earlier, too, about changing and how times are always changing. So, at some point, the youth or the young adults have to step up and take ownership of their faith. And so with that, we oftentimes, or we should, put more emphasis on the youth and the young members of the faith. Because at some point, they're going to be the ones running the church. They're going to be the ones having to form their kids, their parishioners. And so oftentimes, it's the unlikely people that eventually will step up.
Yeah. And I think, if you paid attention to our nice running through of names here, you'd notice that we have 4 gentlemen and a lady sitting in this room. And and there is so often a tendency for women to accept this responsibility as a disciple, and for women to accept the responsibility of, in a relationship, right? Girls do the missionary dating thing, the evangel dating, whatever you want to call it. We do that so often because we go into these relationships and, we think we can change a guy and whatever. And so often you walk into a Catholic church and you just see a sea full of women or older men. Older men. You don't very frequently see a lot of young adult Catholic men. And so I just wanted to identify the fact that, they are out there. And yes, you too, young men, are called to be disciples of God. The 12 apostles were all men. Thank you. But also,
that's crazy.
We're this group of people where when you look at us, you'd think that we're a really weird setup of people, right? Why wouldn't
We
you
are.
want...
Tad.
We are.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you want an even balance of guys and girls? Why wouldn't you want to... We really wanted to address this fact of, it seems, not that it should be this way, but it seems almost like it's unlikely to see a group of young men discussing the faith. And, obviously I'm a woman, so, I can't necessarily testify to this. Did you guys ever notice something in your life where, or a time in your life where you walked into a church or you were sitting in a group and you were just there are no dudes here, and, why am I the only guy that's pursuing Catholicism?
I would say most definitely, not just in church or on Sunday Mass, but the group of us guys that go to weekly Thursday Mass, it is in a chapel, so it's a very small amount of people, but there is one other guy outside of the 5 of us men that go together, 5 or 6.
Usually it's somewhere between 5 to 8
Yeah,
that would show up.
And this other man, he's, I would say, well into his 80s that he goes. And then we're lucky if there's one other guy besides him. But it's just to the point, it's like, this is very, very struggling to see that we don't have a strong base of people that we can rely to as young men into the church. Matthew or Ryan, do you have anything else to say about that?
No, I don't have anything off that specific topic.
No.
Anybody else?
Adequately put, Jason.
Nice.
Jack.
So I just, I think when we came up with the word unlikely, we were looking at, yes, ourselves, the makeup of our group, and what are the odds that we would all be sitting here and that we would all be blessed enough to know each other, and what are the odds, right? But also, I think it's worth mentioning that you, listener, should look at your own life and see, like, how is God calling me to discipleship? And odds are it's pretty unlikely. It's pretty bananas. The old cliche that you've heard on every discernment retreat is, God does not call the qualified, he qualifies the called, right? And it's that idea of, like, no matter where you are in your life, like, God's gonna call you to do more and to be more and all of these things. And so I have a quote here. It's St. Francis de Sales. Do not wish to be anything but what you are, and try to be that perfectly. So you're not called to be somebody else. You're not called to be this, like, stoic, perfect soldier who gets skinned alive. St. Bartholomew, he's super cool. Definitely check him out. Super, super, super
really,
cool.
Really pushing that.
Definitely check out St. Bartholomew.
He actually sponsored today's podcast. Thank you.
Sponsored by St. Bartholomew. The odds are, I suspect the majority of us that are going to be listening to this are from the United States. Odds are, in the United States in 2018, you're not going to be skinned alive. Maybe, but odds are not as strong. You may be metaphorically skinned alive every single day of your life for being Catholic, and that sucks. So be who you are and be that perfectly, because the world so desperately needs people that are, like, authentic.
And I think that with tying that back to, like, being the young adults that we are, it is something that majority of us struggle with, whether it be within our faith life or out of our faith life. That is something that a lot of people our generation struggle with, is just being themselves. And I think that is something that's really cool about our faith, is that it applies to your regular day life. Like, you don't need to separate. You shouldn't separate. You should be actively living your Catholic faith.
The integrated life.
Yeah, Louise and all her fancy terms over here.
It's very, like, I think that's Opus Dei, just, like, integrated life.
But that is something that we should all be seeking to do, is living our faith life day to day.
Yeah, I think...
Very well put.
Yes, indeed. I think with that, though, it comes to realizing what you're called to do, and that we're called to have them integrated. We hear in the Bible from Samuel's story.
Our scripture scholar in the corner
Yes.
over there. Look at
Right.
you go, Ryan.
Yeah, so Samuel, for those of you who don't recall or don't know what I'm getting at, he was called, I believe, 3 times total where he heard God's voice. But it wasn't until the 3rd time where he actually realized what he was being called to do. And so for us, I think this is applicable, but I'm sure for you guys as well, you need to be actively listening for your calling. And you may not hear it the first time, but you will eventually.
Jason's putting on lotion. Jason's putting on lotion sneakily, and we just, like, could not.
We're all very distracted at the moment.
We are called.
Characters.
Well, yeah, we're characters. We're unlikely disciples. Wow, look at that. You know, you're being called by a Father that loves you all the time. All the time. God is always inviting us. We just so often are too dumb to open the dang door, right? Like, God is ringing the doorbell constantly, and we just don't go to the door like the bad millennials who never answer the door. And so when you think about what is God calling you to do, and what is God calling us to do, and where do we fit into the modern world? How are we supposed to be saints with social media? How are we supposed to be saints with, you know, music? How are we supposed to be saints in my, you know, random biology class on Monday, right? Like, I'm not in a biology class, but, like, how are you supposed to be living sainthood in your daily life? How are you being called to discipleship in your unlikely, weird, strange life circumstance, in your really monotonous classes, in your really boring job. You know, maybe you love your job. How's God calling you to discipleship in that moment?
Question for everybody: how are you trying to listen for God's call
Ooh.
through discipleship?
By being part of this podcast.
Hey! Yay!
Jack, what about you?
Oh, I thought this was a question for the audience. I guess it could
Well,
be too.
I want to hear.
Yeah,
So
listen
you
to
have to
this.
say.
Answer the question in your own home. Talk to yourself in the car, in the mirror.
That was very, very.
Roll your window
Aggressive.
down. Ask the guy sitting next to you at the stop sign too.
Yeah, true that. Could you like elaborate on the original question exactly?
Yeah, so
We got a little bit sidetracked.
no, we're good. So Louisa was talking about hearing God's call. So the question I had posed was referring to how are we individually trying to hear how God's calling us to discipleship or to be disciples.
How I do it is I try my best kind of to be in the present moment and see where I can respond to. When I was younger, and still today, I do a lot of daydreaming, which is partially why I kind of forgot what the question was. But regardless, I think oftentimes I find myself in this daydream, and I'm off in La La Land, which was a great movie. Shout out to La La Land and Ryan. Wait, who's
Gosling.
Ryan Gosling. But regardless, no, I'm off thinking about whatever, and I find it so hard just to be in the present moment and absorbing the beauty of the world around me, whether that's, you know, at a dance and all my friends are around us or around me and they're having a great time and I'm able to soak that in, or if we're just hanging out and watching TV and you just take a step back, a metaphorical step back, and look around and go, what a great time it is. So, tying it back into the original question, which was, how am I hearing God's call
to discipleship?
I try to remain in the present moment and see what He wants me to do right now. And there are appropriate times to actually think about your future, but I find myself trying to find where I can glorify God in the present moment.
Hey.
That's just straight facts, cuz.
That is good stuff.
I might phrase it well put, Jack.
well
Yeah.
put.
How
I think.
How do you live that out, Matthew?
Ooh, I think in a similar, it is very similar to what Jack said, but I guess it's kind of like, there was one point in my life where I was overly, like preoccupied with the present, and I was so focused in on that I wasn't necessarily thinking of how what I was doing now was kind of setting me up for where I wanted to go. I couldn't find the balance. So, and then I got very focused on the future. So then I lost track of present. And I really do think that's a common struggle. I found that a lot of other people around me have that similar struggle where they can't find the balance between Jason raising his hands.
Yeah.
But it feels very kind of like tug of war, where I want to be so present and then I lose track of where I want to go and where I want to end up. But then I get so overly focused on the future that, you know, I'm just totally not present. So
I fall into that a lot.
And I
yeah,
think
it's a balance and it's very tough.
Especially like a lot of people our age are like that because our time is so limited in our life that
It's go.
not in our planner,
Yeah.
we're not going to do it.
Or Google Calendar.
Or Google Calendar.
Or the
Shout out to
syllabus.
Google.
They are not sponsoring this.
Yeah.
But they could.
Yeah.
They have great
Jason
products.
and I are particularly guilty of this. We are the extreme of planners and list makers and all that kind of stuff. And I am so guilty of living way beyond the scope of where God is calling me to be right now. And oftentimes I will not neglect my day-to-day responsibilities, but I will not live fully in in the moment and do what God is calling me to do if I'm thinking so far about or so far ahead into the future. And kind of tying it back into Ryan's original question, how am I like hearing God's call, or how is he calling me to discipleship, and how am I paying attention to that? When we were planning this podcast and we were thinking about some ongoing themes that we wanted in the podcast, there's a movie, what is it, A Few Good Men? The one that has the infamous quote, what's his name, Jack Nicholson? I'm not good with actors. Where he is sitting up and he's testifying against something and he's trying to withhold information, and the lawyers are just badgering him. And eventually, he screams out, "You can't handle the truth," right? And it's this iconic line. And that has always bothered me, because so often people say, you're not ready for this truth, or this is above somebody's head, or this is too intense, or this is too in depth, or whatever. And I think that young adults can handle the truth. And so when I think about how I understand how God is calling me, it really comes from this idea that God is calling me through the truth. And when I find out that something is true or beautiful or good, right, the transcendentals, I really see where God is calling me to be and everything like that. And that's definitely going to be an ongoing theme, is that you, as a young adult, can handle the truth, and don't let anybody tell you that you can't. Because ultimately, if you are seeking the truth, you deserve that truth, and God wants you to know the truth. So that's my answer.
Well, thank you everybody to tuning in. So we're going to wrap this up in a little bit. We're going to be doing this, the thing.
The thing.
Yeah, so a quick little... The thing is just a little something you can take away from this. So, any final thoughts? I'm gonna give this over to Ryan.
Yes.
Any final thoughts on this subject as something that the audience should take away?
Yeah. So, Unlikely Disciples. One of the things that's kind of been resonating with me is just when you look at a lot of the characters of the Bible or of our faith, including the saints or current members, we often forget that the people that played a major role were often the people that were the most unlikely to be put in that position. You can even look at as far back as David, the youngest of his siblings. Why was he chosen? You look at St. Timothy, who Paul wrote to in his letters to Timothy. He was a really young bishop at the time.
Yeah.
You look at, there's a number of young saints. One of them, St. Maria of Goretti. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of examples of people who were unlikely to follow God and who did above everything else. For some of them, it cost them their lives. For most of them. So at the end of the day, I think we all need to be conscious and aware of what your actions and what you're displaying, and make a conscious effort of trying to live a life that reflects what you're called to do.
Like Jason said, you have to be the church. Don't go to church, be the church. I mean, you should go to church.
Go to church.
But
please.
Don't just go to church, be the church. Go to mass every week. It's very important.
We'll talk about that later.
I thought this was my final thought.
You did great, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for listening. Refuse to be ground down by mediocrity, folks. Take care.